Welcome to the Parent Guide to Education podcast with Emily and Paul Hughes. Today's guest is Amy Brewer and she is the Science Subject Advisor for OCR.
Evening all, and welcome to Parent Guide to GCSE. We're here today with something that I know you're going to find super relevant, especially if you've got kids in Year 11 at the moment. So we've got to hear Amy, who is the Subject Advisor for GCSE Sciences and Applied Science for OCR. So lots of useful wisdom, I'm sure, to share with you. Hi.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm not too bad, thank you very much.
Now that was a brief introduction. Could you just give us a little bit more detail about, how did you become a subject advisor for science? Where did that come from?
So I taught chemistry and sciences for 15, 16 years. All of the subject advisors at OCR are ex-teachers. And so I finished teaching in May and came to OCR in May of just last year. So I'm a kind of fresh newbie to the team, and there's 6 of us on the GCSE and A-level sciences team, and we support teachers across the country with how they deliver the GCSEs and A-levels. But we also work with the assessments team, and we go and visit schools and give CPD. We help with exam reports and making sure they get out to people to read and offer advice from all the aspects of delivering the course through to examinations.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot to do.
Sneak preview. Are there any sort of changes afoot to the science kind of curriculum?
So it's not a sneak preview. I think Harry mentioned in the previous podcast that the GCSE physics equation sheet is the full version this year, to get that tail end of the pandemic students, to give them the last bit of support that they might need. We don't suspect that it'll carry on next year, but again, watch this space and see what happens. But yes, so this year, one big change is that students will have a full list of all of the physics GCSE equations that they're going to need to know. There's going to be no reason to rote learn them, but it's handy anyway to get used to using them anyway. But yes, that's the only change that's coming in for this year.
So spoiler alert, it's easy to have the everything written down, but knowing how to apply your knowledge to those particular equations still requires a huge amount of hard work.
Absolutely, yeah.
Indeed. So in terms of the advice that you can give, there are going to be parents who are listening and thinking, well, that's great, but my child's not doing OCR. How applicable across the sciences? Is it similar to, my subject was maths, and it was pretty much the same across the exam boards, dependent on a few variables. So similar?
Yeah, so it's very similar. So all of the content is dictated by Ofqual and the DFE. So all of the GCSEs have a very, very similar baseline of knowledge, very similar assessment styles. Our papers are a little bit different from AQAs in certain respects. So the gateway qualification that the majority of students follow for OCR starts with 10 or 15 multiple choice questions. So they're all up front at the beginning of the paper. Whereas if you study AQA or even our 21st century qualification, those multiple choice questions are kind of dotted around throughout the whole course. In very similar, that the GCSE papers will ramp up in complexity. So they'll start off with low kind of standard level and then move up to standard and higher level depending on foundation or higher tier. So the last questions you do will be pushing up towards the higher grades of each of those papers. So that's going to be standard for all of the science GCSEs. And yeah, there's still a 6-mark question level of response. Practical skills make up about 15 to 20% of the marks, and mathematical skills make between 10 and 30% of the final marks of a paper. So that's standard across all the GCSEs. So any advice from any of the boards will be very similar across them.
Awesome. And what I'm hearing is if you start at the end of the paper and work your way towards the beginning, then it's just going to get easier as you go.
Exactly. Get out of the way. So sometimes I've said that to students, more so with my higher tier students or my separate science students. I might say, do you know what? Start with the long answer response if you want to get that out of the way, or at least read it first, so you can start kind of it's dwelling around in your head. You're starting to think about how you're going to plan it. You can come back and flip forwards every time a spark comes. You can come and write it down as part of your planning. So sometimes I would suggest students do that, but We find that especially with foundation tier students and the gateway paper, because it's the multiple choice questions, they're instantly going and feeling like they can accomplish some of the marks all the way through. So actually with foundation tier students, it's better that they start from the beginning.
Yeah, it would worry me looking at the harder latter questions. If it freaks you,
yes,
that you could. Some students would go into a head spin, wouldn't they?
Yeah, so definitely.
Definitely, horses for courses on that one.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to ask was, when as a teacher, you're always going over the past papers, questions that you've got in your folder from yesteryear. There comes a point where students have seen them all. If they do OCR, you've been through it, you've done the last 5 years worth of. Is it, I mean, I know that you just said the style of paper is different, but actually using different exam board papers is probably still completely valid for something like science.
Yeah, totally. So the older papers, the previous spec papers are even then are still valuable. They the content hasn't changed drastically. Small bits have come in, small bits have come out. So yeah, if you're using other boards exam questions, just because you need even more chances to practice, as long as when you're looking at the mark scheme, you're thinking like an OCR student or like an AQA student. When you're looking at the mark scheme, what would actually my board expect from that response? That would be fine.
And something that, I mean, might not be totally relevant, because we might have people watching and listening who are parents of year 11s, but if we've got parents of, so our daughter's just made her GCSE options, and she had the choice between doing triple science or single sciences, as they're known. Parents get really confused about what's the difference between triple science or single sciences, and all the different language that's used. You know, some boards call things combined science, and sometimes it's coordinated science, and keeping track of them all, it hurts my brain. And then obviously you've got the 21st century, and you've got the gateway. Can you just give us a little bit of a guided tour of your stuff, because that'd be really helpful, I think.
Sure. So combined science papers, the combined science is for students who possibly not going to be transitioning to A-level, although it's not impossible. It just means that because the separate sciences have got a slightly more topics in them, the gap between GCSE and A-level is a bit smaller. But the majority of students would do combined sciences or separate sciences. And schools vary that. So either schools select themselves which students are going to be studying separate sciences, or students opt into it. Maybe they have like an interview process for them to be able to move into separate sciences. And again, it varies between whether there's an entry exam, some schools do. Otherwise, it might be that the variation might be the number of hours in the timetable. So some schools will have fewer hours for combined sciences dedicated to it versus separate sciences. Sometimes you might have only 2 teachers teaching you combined science, so they will share the topics between them. Other times you might have a dedicated biology, physics and chemistry teacher. So that varies. So then the experience of studying those courses varies between schools as well. In OCR, so the gateway science is concept-led. So it's the more traditional sense of a biology topic, a chemistry topic and a physics topic. Whereas 21st century is more got of a story. So there's more overlap between them. There's more of an idea theme threads that we call them ideas of science, from science, and they thread through the concepts. So it's more context-led than concept-led. And then there's a variation in the number of papers. So if you did combined science for Gateway, you'd do 6 papers, 2 in biology, physics and chemistry. Whereas if you did combined science in 21st century, there's 1 biology, 1 physics, 1 chemistry, and then a combined science paper where it's all lumped in together, and it'll jump around between biology, chemistry and physics. The skills are still there. The same kind of style of questioning is still going to be there. And that's similar to AQA. So some of the other boards might have the trilogy and synergy. So that's the other ones that usually students are more usually students are following the trilogy than they are the synergy. The synergy is exactly, there's a lot of words. So the synergy is a bit like our 21st century, where there's a story that maps through the concepts, and it's more concept led than context led. And different schools find their students do better or worse with the different styles. So there's also fewer papers in 21st century, so a lot of centres prefer that, so they've not got to sit. We have, so it's an hour and 10 minutes is the 6 papers each, so that's That's a lot of time to be sitting doing exams, but yeah. So yes, there is a lot of language, but schools will choose what suits their students and what their teachers are able to deliver the best and to get the best results out.
Hardest job in the world, I think, is an exams officer at a school, to work your way through all of that and make sure everyone's put in for at the correct level. It's rocket science.
I think yourself lucky, because we for our GCSE toolkit, we've put together, there's an exams timetable generator, so you can create your child's personalised exam timetable. Sure. So I have to go through every single exam board and put in every single exam and which one is which, and then we're doing a past paper bank, so I'm having to do the same thing. And science, I do curse it a little bit every time I have to do that, because there's just such variety and so many different papers and so many options.
Well, I used to do bespoke revision timetables for some of our clients, and the sciences, it was everything, it's so similar but everything's different.
Yes,
there's no same description, there's no same, it was always something where I had to think quite specific, hard.
But obviously for parents, the biggest choice is usually between, do you do the one that's worth 2 GCSEs or the one that's worth 3, which is the typical science or the single sciences. Coordinated or combined is normally worth 2 GCSEs. Won't get a choice about which exam board it is or which style it is, because that will be something that schools will have decided for you. So you as parents have to worry less about this. It's just about whether they do 3 or 2. But thank you, that was really helpful, because we do get quite a lot of questions about that. And actually we also get quite a lot of questions about the grading on the combined or coordinated science, the one that's worth the 2 GCSEs. Could you just talk us through that as well? Yes,
so you get 2 GCSEs, as you said, and it starts with a 1-1, then goes to a 1-2, and then a 2-2, and then a 2-3, and so it moves up in increments like that. There's about, I was looking at it today, there's about 8 marks between each of the grade boundaries, between 8 and then, about 6 to 8 marks between each of the grade boundaries. So you move upwards between the grade boundaries. And it means there's a broader spread than there used to be with the old A to E grading system. And that's what it will look like. So for foundation tier, it goes from 1-1 up to 5-5. For higher tier, it goes from 4-4 up to 9-9, but there is a little bit of a pad on the higher tier, so you can get a 3 just around. So and then below that will be a U grading for the higher tier. So one of the questions we get a lot is about tiering and whether students are on the right tier and how to make those decisions. And the guidance is if there is any risk of them missing out on a 5 because they're sitting the higher tier, then they're much safer on a foundation tier paper.
I mean, it must be, it can't, surely a school can't put a student in and end up with a U, because on the higher tier.
It's very rare. It's very, very rare. I think I looked up the numbers. It was something like 1%, 2% of the population that actually sit the GCSE exams end up being on or even less than that. It's about 1,000 students in the country who actually end up getting a U overall. So schools are much, much better at putting them on the right tier. Yeah.
And often that might be because they've missed an exam for one reason or another, rather than.
Sure. So for parents, if they get like a 6-7 or a 7-6, it's like a 6+ or a 7-.
Yeah, it's like halfway between one and one and the next. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome.
Can I just ask about the applied science? Are you talking about Cambridge Technical, was it?
Yes, so that's for level 3. So that's when you get to 6th form.
So with the future of Cambridge Technical, with tech levels coming in, T levels coming in, there's talk that the Cambridge Technical or the BTECs are going to be phased. Is that happening? What's the timeline?
So the timeline for those is that a number of the qualifications will cease to be funded by the end of July 2025. And so students will then move on to new qualifications from September 2025 onwards. There's another phase, so they're coming in 2 cycles. There's 2 waves of it going on. It's any qualification that overlaps too much with the T-level content, so that students are either taking the T-levels or they're taking A-levels with the new qualifications. They're going to be called alternative academic qualifications, AAQs, because we needed another acronym.
Obviously.
So a lot of the qualifications are being reformed. I'm working on the science ones at the moment. So we currently have applied science, which is either A-level sized or it goes up to 3 A-level sizes. So it's those qualifications that are bigger than A-level are the ones that are looking to be reformed in the future. So that is happening. There's a timeline for that, and this first lot will start to be taught September 2025.
Okay, it's one of those things that's probably worth having in mind as a parent if that's going to be your child's year group, because I know as a teacher, every time they change something, even though it's minimal changes with maths, I mean, you will have had more with ICT and with business,
every year without fail.
Even with the minimal changes, you feel like you're having to then come up with new resources as the teacher, but also there aren't the past papers to give them and so on, which just makes life that little bit more complicated to begin with. So
it is tricky. It's the idea will be that students will have more of an opportunity to move on to university levels or into apprenticeships by taking these new qualifications from September 2025, or T levels will hopefully do the same route as well. I'm really excited about my new courses because we've got some really decent content in there that I think students and teachers will really enjoy learning about. So it's actually giving us an opportunity to take on all of the feedback that we've got from teachers about what they really want to be able to teach their students and the skills that universities are looking for, and we've embedded them across the 2 new science qualifications. So I'm excited anyway.
But for the current year 11s,
sure,
as things stand at the moment,
they're going to carry on
the opportunity to sit the applied science as normal.
Yes,
and they are great qualifications.
Yes,
whether you do the single or the double, it was always a very popular choice at my school.
Yeah, they're going to carry on as they are until September 2025. They're not going to change.
Awesome. So shall we move on to some specific stuff for year 11's revising then, because that's the bit that's
sure.
As we record this and as we pop this on Facebook, I don't know when you're listening if you're on the podcast, but we've just got less than 75 days to go until exams start now. So parents are starting to be a little bit worried, I think. Well, students are starting to be a little bit
hopefully they're a little bit worried too.
Hopefully, maybe. So in terms of preparation and things, what are some of the best things that students can do to make sure that they are ready for their science GCSE exams?
So for year 11s, I hope by now they're really familiar with whatever revision guide that they've been using in school. If I'm talking to a parent right now and they've got year 10, that's when you really want to get those good habits built in. But if they've got a revision guide, stick with it. At the moment, you're familiar with it, you've used it really well, you've used it often enough that you understand the layout of it, and it's easy for you to find the content of it. So stick with that. I wouldn't go out necessarily going to buy new resources unless you haven't got the exam questions and quizzes that come with those booklets. Those would be really useful, because retrieval practice is the number one, or exam questions, quizzing yourself is the number one way to get better at understanding a topic. So that's really, really key.
Singing from our hymn sheet here.
Absolutely. A lot of schools don't provide those resources, though. It is something that parents have to buy. Sometimes it's ring fenced with pupil premium, but they are fabulous, mainly because of the questions at the end, or at the end of each chapter.
So we've got multiple choice quizzes on our website for OCR that students can use to help them with their revision as well. As a teacher, I used to use something called PMT, Physics and Maths Tutor. So they've got on their webpage by board topic centric exam questions. So if you're just looking at C1, they've got the topics, the questions that are associated with that topic as well. Some of them are a bit the older questions slipped in there as well to give you plenty of practice, but just with a health warning with those, but that's really useful as well. I've thought about asking the other subject advisors. So I work with 2 others, a physicist called Ali and a biologist called Bethan, and we thought of a few other ways that we could help. So maps from memory is a fantastic thing to do with your revision guide as well. And he suggested sort of putting the full complete map on one side of the room and then running to the other side of the room to try and copy it out as much as possible, and then coming back to check how well you've done, that kind of look, cover, write and check technique to go with the mapping from memory. And And then revision cards. So flashcards and revision cards are something that students often sit down to try to make, or teachers suggest in parents' evenings that you should make, but they never usually give enough guidance about how to make them or use them appropriately. So with flashcards, what I would do is take, and this is something that parents should be modelling with their kids as well. Get the specification, or get the revision guide, pick out a content list. What one did I go for? I went for metals and hydrogen are formed at the cathode. So you look up that one thing, it goes on your flashcard. Maybe that's the thing about electrolysis is a really difficult topic in chemistry. So that's why I've headed that way. Write that down on one side and then turn it over and model how to write a question that would retrieve that information. So then you've got a question on one side and the answer on the other side. So that's the first thing to do with the flashcards. The next thing to do would be to use the lightner system with those flashcards. So start to mark out or have little boxes or little piles on your desk of the question I get wrong the most often, the questions I get wrong least often, the questions I always get right, but I still need to keep them going in my head for retrieval practice. And it's about slipping those cards in that order and retrieving them in that order, because it's really easy for kids to always stick to the topics they know really well, and they feel comforted going, oh, I know this really well, and then forcing them with those flashcards to go to the questions that they keep getting wrong regularly is really, really important. And then what I used to do with my mum, so my mum didn't have any science background at all. So when I would make those flashcards with the questions more for her, because then she could ask me the question and she'd have to just flip it over and get the answer as well. So that technique as well is really useful. But then as a parent, what I would do is follow up. Well, why does that happen? So looking up, at the end of a statement, using the words because, but, or so, getting them to extend their answer so that they are explaining it to you in their own words, which is another great technique in revision of you saying, well, how does that work? Rather than just going, yeah, well done, well done, well done. Come back to that one another time. But yeah, that's a really, and using the revision guides to be able to do that is really helpful.
Yeah, and we always say asking genuine questions as well, because sometimes as a teenager, I think you feel like they're asking you to trick you and catch you out. But if you're asking like genuinely, like, I don't remember any of this, can talk me through it.
Yeah.
There's nothing better as a teenager than knowing more than your parents. It's just the best feeling ever. So playing on that as well to some extent can help with their confidence, because you're right, we hear the same thing time in, time out. Kids are going for the things that they know quite well, because it makes them feel confident. If they're revising and they always know the answers, they get the same when they just read through their notes, because it all starts to get really familiar and they feel like they know it all. But when they then get tested on it, it's a whole different ball game.
Yeah,
they've not been working on the tricky stuff. So yeah, some excellent little nuggets in there, I think.
Yeah, so rereading your notes, highlighting, underlining, genuinely the worst kinds of revision techniques, but it's the one that all students come back to because they feel comforted by it. And spending hours rewriting. I used to have so many, particularly girls, rewriting all their notes out with all of the different coloured pens, and they'd come into school with all the different highlighters, and it wouldn't improve their understanding very well because they didn't have a system that went with it. If you have a system where the colours are associated with concepts or challenging topics and things like that, then that's the colour that you remember. So yeah, stay away from, if they're copying stuff out and not summarising or turning it into a table or a diagram or a flow chart, then actually they're not learning from that process.
Yeah, anything active is much better than anything passive. And it's horses for courses, isn't it? It's picking the right techniques that work for your child, or them picking the right techniques that work for them. But yeah, helping to nudge them in the right direction, because what we get from parents is but that's how I revised, like that's how we did it when we were at school. But we know so much more now about how memory works and how the brain processes things, and so it would be daft not to use those. It'd be a bit like going, yes, but I've always hand washed my clothes, why would I want to use a washing machine? Well, duh, because it's faster and easier. So yeah, I think there's a lot of important stuff there for students who maybe haven't nailed that yet, or for parents who are just out there not quite knowing how to help. Because again, it's it's tricky. Lots has
So
changed.
another technique to go with that is the Pomodoro technique. So that comes from the wind up tomato that you use in the kitchen. So 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. Repeat that 3 times more, and then have a long break. Because again, what's usual with studying is someone will lock themselves in their bedroom and they'll reread and rewrite and copy out, and they'll spend hours and hours where we know that they will only retain 20-30% of whatever period of time they're revising. So making sure that you're being strict in how long they're actually revising is a good tip for parents as well, because it won't be useful learning. So whatever they're doing in that time, it is going to be useful. They give themselves that long break. And then there's a great website I found. I'm trying to think of what I wrote it down. I have my notes. Where did I write that one down? So a great website by a lady called Lucy Parsons that's worth looking up. And she's not only got how to use the Pomodoro technique really well, but she's got what should you do in those 5 minutes and what should you do in those long break times, to give concepts of don't just go and sit on your phone. Do actually use that time very usefully. Go for a little sprint, do some Pilates or some yoga, and trying to get teenagers to convince them that that's useful. But again, those good habits, starting them now, especially if you've got year 10, year 9s coming up, that's a really good habit.
Yeah, and it kind of goes with the spaced learning technique. You have to do something different that challenges you in a different way. So it's something physical. Like when they were training us on it, they had us trying to juggle and trying to build things out of straws and all sorts of madness, but it works.
Yes,
really effective. So
yes,
absolutely.
So talking about the habits to get into, as a left-hander and a former teacher, my writing is horrendous. What's the exam board sort of take on poor writing, where the examiner can't read? How does it work? In fact, let's go back to basics. When the exam paper arrives on the doorstep of OCR, how does it get to the examiners? Because there's lots of different theories about one paper will get split up, so one examiner will get all answers, questions 1 to 3. The next examiner will get 4 to 6, etc. Is that how it works?
So the papers coming to us, they get chopped up and scanned. So an examiner will open up their paper. They won't see the names or any of the other details on the front of the paper, but they will have all of the questions from that paper. Sometimes examiners mark question to question depending on the subject. So they will do all of question 1s, and they might mark 100 question 1s and then move on to question 2, or they might mark the whole paper. It depends on the type of marking that they're doing. So a tip for legibility, as long as it's legible, and examiners are really good, because all of our examiners are ex-teachers most of the time. They're used to reading that language. If they have a problem, what they do is they send it up to the chief examiner, and the chief examiner will have a look at it as well. So it's never, students are always given the opportunity to score as many marks as possible. In terms of how they write their answer, it needs to stay in that space where the question is being scanned, because if it's in question 1A, it has to stay in the box for the question 1A. So that's the only thing in terms of students writing their answers on the lines within the space provided for that particular question, or it goes onto the extra space page that gets attached to the end of the paper. The other thing that we particularly have in the sciences is, and probably in maths as well, is showing your working out. So often we're seeing more students do that now. It's really encouraging to see more students showing all of their working out, but they'll do a bit on this side and then a bit down the left and a bit down the right, and they'll cross this out, and then that becomes difficult for examiners to find the marks that they want to award. So just in that bit, take a breath, think about the answer and how you're going to stage it out so that it can be read and you score as many of the marks as possible.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's I'm familiar with the frustrations of trying to mark the chaos that has been there.
All the way down the left, and there's a bit squeezed down on the bottom, but that bit won't be read if it trails down the side of the paper and then up the other end again.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm having flashbacks just thinking. So in terms of kind of revision and making sure that they're ready for the exams, is there anything else that we haven't talked about yet that you were thinking you would be useful to mention, or have we covered it all?
So Level of response questions is something that often people want to know more about and how to deal with. And it goes with the legibility thing. So in the last summer exam series, especially on foundation tier, somewhere between 10 and 20% of students didn't try the level of response question, depending on the paper. And that's sad to see. That's kind of been consistent through GCSEs anyway. We used to talk about 25% of students don't attempt it. So in higher tier, it's much, much higher, which is really encouraging. Well over 90% of students will attempt the long answer response, the long level of response question. So it's really difficult because it's that big chunk of lined blank paper that you've got to fill in, and often that's really quite scary. So some techniques to go with that is to remind kids and students that you don't have to write in continuous prose for science. Bullet points, labeled diagrams, comparative tables, especially if you're comparing advantages and disadvantages of two different things, having them side by side against each other actually makes the examiner's job really, really easy. Because say there's a common question is about carrier bags between plastic and paper, or plastic and biodegradable materials. So each of the advantages against the cons side by side would make it really simple to write out. And then usually that at the end just needs a justification sentence. And therefore I think that this one is better because, and then just summary. So students forget that that's possible, and even with practical questions. So your previous podcaster, Harry, he was saying that usually the 6 marker is practical questions. It varies. So in the last lot of foundation tier questions from the last summer, only 2 out of the 6 papers had practical questions as their level of response question. But for those questions, a flow diagram with the practical laid out as a flow diagram would be absolutely fine. So students shouldn't think that they have to write with continuous prose and connectives. And often what we see is students will start like an English answer perhaps and go, the reason why this one is the best is because, and we don't need that. Scientists want brief, sharp, short responses. Bullet points are perfect because actually that's how the mark scheme's laid out anyway. And you make the examiner's life a lot easier if it's laid out that way too. So yeah, that's getting your kids to get over that hurdle of there's a really big space and what do I write is really important. There's techniques out there called one called bug. So box the command word, underline the key ideas, and glance back over the question before you start are really key techniques where you can just start by doing that. If you can't actually get to the answer, at least that bit you can manage. And then you start to brainstorm and label the question with, oh, I know that links to this. I need to talk about these things. Oh, that's a group 1 metal. Let me write that next to the name of the metal. Things like that. It gets your foot in the door, gets them actually just going on it. So yeah, that's the 6 mark question is kids don't like it. And it is hard to get them over that. But practice on those.
I used to find very much the same in maths. If there was a 5 or 6 mark question, they'd panic, think it was therefore really complicated and not try.
Yeah.
And my prompt was always, okay, so what can you do? What could you do in this? Because even if they just pick 2 numbers out of the question and multiply them together,
yeah,
that might get them a mark.
Yeah, definitely.
You know when you're more than capable of doing that. So try something, anything.
Yeah, and you're not
just,
you're not even necessarily aiming for the 6 marks. If you're aiming for 3 or 4 marks, then start to write things down. Don't think that because I can't get 6, I shouldn't write anything down. It's just getting a few marks that are going to incrementally add to your final mark at the end of the paper.
And 4 marks or 3 marks is half a grade boundary. So.
Exactly that.
You don't have to get it right, you just have to get it going.
Exactly, definitely.
Fabulous. Right. I think I've done all my questions from this end.
Oh, I have one more though.
Sure.
Any tips, as there are going to be a lot of students out there doing past papers in the run up to this. Obviously, I think science and maths are probably the easiest of the past papers to mark if you're going from a mark scheme generally for most things, because it is, as you said, it's quite like we just want the facts. We just want
it's objective, not subjective.
Yeah. So are there any top tips for using past papers and mark schemes specifically to be able to mark your work as accurately as possible?
So our past papers are easy to find on our support hub. I would say that first of all. Some of our web pages are designed for teachers, but if you go to the support hub for OCR, they'll be able to find what's called our past paper finder, and they can find those past papers mark schemes there really easily. For past papers, I think actually just starting with 1 or 2 questions at a go. Don't sit down and try to do for separate sciences, the paper is 1 hour and 45 minutes long. Don't sit there and try to do the whole thing in one go. Do it in chunks. Get question 1 sorted, get question 2 sorted, and then come back to it. So partly that Pomodoro technique of doing a bit and then stopping. Being really strict with the mark scheme. If things are underlined or in bold because it's a keyword that absolutely has to be in the response, don't go, oh yeah, well, I was close, I was near to that. Be really strict with yourself. And if you if you've missed that keyword or key concept, that becomes your flashcard that then goes back into your pile. So that's really important. It's not just doing the past paper and marking it, but actually reflecting on it, that metacognition process of reflecting on what have I missed, where is the gap in my understanding or misconception that I've still got. Right, I need to make a flashcard, which then becomes something as part of a thing I always use. So we've got a few revision materials coming out on Instagram, on our OCR Instagram account, with tips for a lot of the GCSEs and A-level subjects, and one of the ones I've put on there is making a toilet poster.
Yes.
So
they always used to laugh when I suggested it, but it's not just me, you see.
I've never heard of that.
So back home, when in London, when I was growing up, the toilet seat was opposite the toilet door. So when the toilet door was shut, you could see the back of the toilet door. So any concept I was finding difficult became a poster or a large flashcard, and it got stuck on the back of the toilet door. And my sister used to have to learn it. My stepdad used to have to learn it, but it was there, and that consistently. You are visiting the toilet several times a day, especially when you're at home revising. You're going to be seeing that as long as you're drinking enough and eating enough, you're going to see that technique, that poster a lot of the time, and then rotating those. So once you've got it, take it down, put up the new one. So yeah, past papers definitely, mark schemes being strict, but anything you're not quite getting and you're being, you wish you could get that mark, that becomes the flashcard that then goes into your program.
Indeed, and post-its are great for that.
And post-its as well. And I used to have it all up the side of my bedroom wall as well.
Do fall off eventually, they lose their stickiness.
But you don't want to have them on there for too long, you see.
But the other thing is, we've got phones. So some of my best A-level students used to make their revision poster. They used to have a blackboard actually, and used to use chalk on their blackboard and make a little mind map on there. And they'd take a photo of it and they'd send it to their friends. So then it becomes a photo album that they can scroll through when they're traveling on the bus or whatever. Because paper just gets crumpled up, loses its stickiness, and you just gets tea stains on it and all the rest of it. So taking photos,
because you look at your lock screen more than you think you do.
So anything that becomes really difficult, and on the new iPhone iOS, your lock screen, your picture can change. So you can set it so that you set an album up, you set up your favorite photos, and it can change every time you refresh it or every hour. So yeah, definitely taking photos of any concepts that's come up that is tricky is a bonus these days.
Well, that's definitely some ninja tips there, I think.
Probably a perfect place to stop. I don't think we've done a podcast where we both sat there nodding quite so wildly. So many of the
and I just keep wanting to go, that's what I say. Hopefully you found some really wonderfully useful stuff in here. I know we found it really, really helpful. There have been some great tips, and a massive thank you.
Amy, yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Parent Guide to Education podcast. Please favourite or follow us on your preferred podcast app to ensure you get notified as each episode is released. We'd also be grateful if you could leave us a great review or rating. See you on the next episode.